The story you tell tells people everything about you, about what you care about what you fear, what you want to be, what you don't want to be.
Welcome to Angle on Writing, a podcast about writing, publishing, and book marketing. Welcome, writers. I'm happy today because I've got a very interesting guest, uh, and in a genre that I'm not very familiar with. Magical realism. Uh, so it's going to be very interesting. Welcome, Stephanie Barbé Hammer.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you for joining me. And I see that you write novels and short fiction and poetry. So, what did you start with? Where did you start?
That's a great question. I started writing pretty early. I learned how to read and write belatedly because my mother assumed that the school was going to teach me how to do all these things, and first graders came to school in my fancy private school in New York, already knowing how to read and write. So she had to take this up. She was not a kind teacher, but she was an effective one. And I was very proud when I got through one of the Dr. Seuss books, and I loved discovering how words sounded when I read out loud. That was so exciting to me. So I wrote my first poem at around 6 and a half, and it was something about the sun shining and how I felt fine, shine and fine. And I was so excited that that happened. It was so great. And then I also loved, again, Dr. Seuss kind of comical fairy tales and stories. And I liked explaining them to people, which is why it makes sense that I became a professor. And I also liked changing them because I didn't always like the ending or the way they resolved. So I would, when I explained, say, well, what really ought to happen is that the stepmother and Snow White should become friends. They go off and live in the castle, and we forget about the prince.
Well, that I love that. I mean, that is one of the funnest things. I think that's a great writing prompt if people um are thinking of, well, what should I write? I don't think my ideas are good enough. Well, take a story that's already been told and tell it better.
Right, right. And since every possible story has already been told, so we just don't need to worry about that, writers can feel very free to say, that Frog Prince story, I don't love that. I don't love the way that that works. So how could it be tweaked and improved?
So is that how you always knew you were a writer? Did you study it in school?
That's a great question. I certainly studied writing when I was in grade school and in high school. There were creative writing prompts that came in our classes, and I also had the pleasure of sitting on the board of the creative writing journal in my high school, which was a private school in New York. And that was an important influence. But then at a certain point in college, writing got kind of hard for me. It felt like it was going to be, it was and is a very competitive field. My parents had financial problems, and there was a lot of pressure on me to get some kind of a job. And I thought writing is probably not my ticket, but I did take a creative writing poetry class at my senior year of college. And then much, much later, I went back to school and got an MFA. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
So, how did you first start publishing your writing once you got knew that you wanted to publish?
Well, it happened actually before I consciously admitted that I wanted to publish. I was a college professor in the UC system for many years. I taught at UC Riverside, which was a wonderful, wonderful place to teach. Lots of first generation college goers, lots of DACA students, students really, really hungry and eager to learn. And I was teaching the infamous great books class, which goes from the Bible to now. And I was teaching a section on Whitman, and a student came up to me afterwards and said, "Do you write creatively?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do." I was very surprised that they'd noticed. I'd been writing privately for years, poetry mostly. And this student said, "Well, I'm on the board of the Mosaic Literary Journal here at UCR. You should submit something to us." So I had submitted a few poems and they were published. And so I stumbled into publication. I made some comment to him about, "Oh, I never thought I'd be published." And he was such a smart student. He said, "Well, very few people write with the idea of never sharing it. Most people write to be published ultimately because most writers want to be seen." Very brilliant. So that's how I started. And after talking to him and after this first publication in the UCR Literary Journal, I thought, yeah, I kind of do want to publish my work. So I started sending out poetry. And as I'm sure some of your other guests have noted, getting published in poetry world is actually quite difficult. There are a lot of poets out there, and there are a lot of poems circulating. And at a certain point, I found it very difficult to publish. And so my husband had the bright idea, why don't you try writing fiction? And I thought, oh no, I could never do that. Fiction writing is really hard and it's very revealing, which it is. People think, oh, poetry is so revealing. No, the story you tell tells people everything about you, about what you care about what you fear, what you want to be, what you don't want to be. I think it's an extremely revealing genre. And again, another friend convinced me to take a class at UCLA Extension with a writer whose name was Amy Bender, who is a quite well-known Los Angeles writer. She's a magical realist. And that's how I got involved with magical realism.
So I really am not sure what the genre is. I mean, I know I've read Narnia and
Yay! Those are such fabulous books. You get a very high ranking from me for being a Narnia reader. Yay.
yeah, I love that. And for fantasy, I've read Twilight, but I don't know if that counts. But so kind of give me an idea. What is this genre really about?
Awesome question. It's an intimidating genre. I think it's because it's three word it's a couple. So if it's magical realism, but it's magical realist fiction or magical realist drama, that sounds really fancy and complicated. But your point about Narnia is wonderful. Magical realism is not Narnia. It takes the world of realism, Hemingway, for example. The food was good. I loved her. She is dead. I am sad. I'm thinking of Farewell to Arms. It takes that world and that way of looking at the world and injects just one or two or three impossible or unreal elements. So Narnia is fantasy, beautiful fantasy. It's one of my favorite book series. I read it again recently and just feel such admiration for it. But that's fantasy. Twilight is also fantasy because there's too much that's fantastical in it for it to be Hemingway. Hemingway would look at that world and go, no, too crazy. There's too much going on that's unreal. Think somebody like Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote a story about a small town in South America someplace, and there's a man, an old man with enormous wings. And that's it. That's the weird thing. And so the family doesn't know what to do with this old man with his wings. The wings are very difficult to maintain. The story goes into what happens with between this man and the rest of the world. But it's just that one impossible thing. And then everybody else reacts to the impossible thing accordingly. Now, why does anybody want to write this way? Well, it's a shortcut, really. My argument has always been that magical realism is easier than realism because with Hemingway, If you've got the old man, you have all these complicated things you need to explain about his personality and backstory and why he's so difficult to deal with and why he doesn't get along with his family. With magical realism, he's got the weird wings, so that's the problem. It's a shortcut for creating conflict, for raising stakes, for making things complicated for your characters.
So I'm still that's a great example, and I kind of get it. I need a little bit more help. Um, so the first thing I thought of was kind of one thing I love is I love time travel, where
Yes,
somebody finds an amulet and somehow when they, pass through a certain place, they go into a different time kind of thing. How is that is fit in?
yeah, that would be more speculative fiction. Although I want to tell writers not to sweat this, particularly at the beginning, but write the book or write the story you want to write, and then you can figure out what the category is later. I don't want these terms to halt anybody or scare anybody or impede anybody. If you want to write about an amulet that takes you to the 19th century or the 16th century, go for it. And write your draft and then have someone help you figure out what it is. But I would say that that is more speculative, light SF, light science fiction, rather than magical realism. Here's another example of a magical realist novel, and that's my teacher, Amy Bender. The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake. Girl, unremarkable, growing up in LA with her family. Their, her brother is the sort of special and weird one. She gets kind of ignored, considered unremarkable. She has a piece of birthday cake and suddenly tastes all of the emotions of the people involved in making it, including the baker and the people who made the flour, the people who harvested the eggs for the frosting. And it's this weird, very disturbing talent. And that's the basis of the novel. And that's it. She's a regular girl living, I think she lives in Los Feliz, but forgive me, Amy, if got her in the wrong section of Los Angeles. The novel goes on from there.
See, these are fascinating, and so um, in the genre. So does that do the plotting? Is it more of a literary kind of plotting, or do they have more of do they ever do more of a high stakes kind of a heavy plot?
These tend to be literary novels. And as a literary person, I really admire that. In fact, Marquez is great at creating these really complicated narratives with all kinds of elements and weird things where members of the family all have the same name, for example. That's 100 Years of Solitude. And not so much happens in them. And Lisa, that is something that really interests me. American novels really kind of almost from the get-go are very action-packed, lots going on. And I love novels where not so much happens. I'm a big Murakami fan. He has things happen. And I just finished a novel by, I have to remind myself of his name, Lutz Zeiler. He's German. And this is a podcast, so you have to imagine it's like a 300-page long novel called Star 111, which is the name of a kind of radio. The importance of the radio is announced two-thirds through the book. There's a mystery involving the guy's parents that gets revealed in the last 20 pages of the novel. Unacceptable for an American market, but it was a best-selling novel in Germany. And I guess I'm interested, once a professor, always a professor, I'm interested in sort of pushing the limits for American readers on what they will accept in a story, because I feel like we could stand to be more open and more spacious in terms of what we will allow fiction to do as readers.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed recently, as far, well, music as well, but also in literature, is a lot of blending of genres.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, even Colleen Hoover has written fantasy. So,
Yeah, I think that that's great, actually. I think that's really healthy because arguably these genres are, and again, you're the expert, are kind of ways to market books, but they're not necessarily how the creative process works. The creative process, I think, can be much more capacious and fun and I want to say intergalactic, which isn't right, intergeneric, I guess is what I want to say.
so when you get a story idea, talking about the creative process, when you get a story idea, how do you deal with it in order to make it to flesh it out?
Gosh, it's very various. With short stories, things generally start a little bit like poems do with a sentence. A recent story that I wrote starts with a sentence about a house and then says, well, it wasn't a house exactly. And it was those two sentences that kind of generated the short story. I just let the language kind of push it. With novels, it tends to be more situational or even imagistic. My most recent novel, which came out a few years ago, I imagine two people on a train going from New York to Montreal. And I think, okay, there's two people. At first, I thought it was two women. It becomes a man and a woman. What are they doing? They're looking for someone. Who are they looking for? Someone's missing on the train. And then what unfolds is actually my most generically normal novel, although it is magical realist. And that's a man and a woman looking for an old man who has gone missing on the train in what is clearly an homage to The Lady Vanishes by Hitchcock, which is one of my favorite movies. So it's a mystery set on a train, so locked room. Again, it's one of my most no, as a friend said, it's one of your more normal stories. And I said, you're right. It's a normal novel, more or less.
So give me some more examples. You mentioned Hitchcock. So some of that stuff, a lot of that, uh, I know that that's film, but still, is there uh, some of that? Where would you put that kind of film genre opposed to what you do?
Well, it's still Journey to Melville City, which is the novel I was just talking about, it's a literary novel. It is, technically speaking, a mystery, and that's how I sold it. It also was a finalist for the Forward Indie Prize in the mystery category. So one of the things that's great about being a magical realist is you can play around with quote unquote genre fiction, although genre fiction is not a term I love because it sounds sort of denigrating. And mysteries are amazing and quite hard to write, by the way. It was quite a humbling experience trying to write one. Um, I'm not sure I've answered your question.
No, that was the perfect answer.
Oh, great. I stumbled into it.
Yeah, well, yeah, since I wasn't really sure what the question, I knew what the question was, but I wasn't quite sure exactly where I was going with that, but you answered it.
Phew.
That's great. So you decided to write novels and you wrote novels. So how have you been going about um getting the word out about them and being an author?
Yes, that's for some of us, that's the big challenge. I love writing. I actually love reading out loud from my own work. I studied acting briefly and I flunked acting, but I was very happy with having learned some of those skills. I'm very comfortable reading my work out loud. Getting the word out, quote unquote, for me is much, much harder. And I've actually started working, if one has the funds, it's great to work with a creativity coach. And I work with Rachel Sarah Thurston, who is famous in the Santa Barbara area. as someone who really can help you kind of target your online profile, which is crucial these days, and think very strategically about how you want to do that rather than just blogging to the universe, which I've done. She's a big believer in creating a profile that is consistent across the platforms, thinking about a mission statement, which I hear things like this and go, whoa, I don't even know what to say. I'm a big talker, as you can tell. Mission statement, I've not I've become completely silent. So she tricked me into creating some of those things. So she's been tremendously helpful. And then in terms of finding a publisher, Lisa, I've been very lucky in that score. I got my first publishing opportunity from a student where I was teaching, and I've been fortunate in making connections and making friends in educational environments. I took courses at UCLA Extension. One of the first class was with Amy Bender. I was lucky enough to learn with her for a year with nine other people, very small class. She and I are still in touch. She made suggestions about where to send my short stories when I was doing those. And I have taken other classes and met other people in those classes and gone to writing conferences. We have a wonderful writing conference coming up in June in Santa Barbara. You go to those kinds of conferences to learn, but also to meet people. And I've met people at those places, and some of those people have been publishers, and they're the people who've published me. I've published mostly with people and small presses that I know.
Yeah, and and you talked about your the branding. Rachel's helping you with your branding, and I'm sure before you met with her, you decided to use your middle name as it is as it read, and I was wondering why you did that.
But why that hard to pronounce middle name? It's, thank you for asking, purely practical. Believe it or not, Stephanie Hammer is quite a common name. There's several German doctors named Stephanie Hammer. There's an athlete named Stephanie Hammer. I'm so not an athlete, so I'm a little jealous of that. And there's another writer out there in the States called Stephanie Hammer. And this was a while ago. This is 2011, 2012. We started receiving each other's rejection letters. And my MFA teacher in up on Whidbey Island, where I did my MFA, Bruce Holland Rogers, wonderful writer, said, you got to use your middle name because you don't want that kind of confusion. And when you publish books, I hadn't published a book yet. So I thought, really? I'm going to publish books? Yay. He said, you don't want that. So use your, and I told him what my middle name was. He says, that's great. That's very distinctive. You speak French. You're influenced by French authors. Use that. So it's, again, marketing tool.
And that's great. Yeah, I actually had a client who had a similar problem where she was writing mysteries and the other person was writing like political stuff, and
Oh gosh.
it really kind of
Yeah.
conflicted, so she had to differentiate there somehow.
Yeah, it's really important. So something to think about for your writers listening. If you have if you're Karen Smith, you need to fiddle around with that name somehow, or maybe even use a nom de plume.
Yeah, yeah, using your French there.
Right, yeah. It just came to me. Sorry. I was like, what is it? Pen name. That's it. Pseudonym. There it is.
Oh, I think the French sounds prettier.
It does. It's a good sounding language, isn't it?
Yes. So you are going to be teaching a magical realism workshop at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference. And so do you have any advice for any new writers out there, maybe people who might be coming to your workshop, or if not this year sometime, or what's your
Sure.
advice?
I'll say something just very quickly about the class because it's a little bit new this year. I have tended to teach all generative workshops. So no read and critique, quote unquote, no feedback, just prompts, prompts, prompts. And over the years, former students and potential students have come up to me and said, gee, I have the beginning of a novel or the beginning of a short story, and I think it might be magical realism. This is the Lisa Engel question, but I'm not sure what it is. So this year, I'm going to be teaching two sessions where I'm inviting students to submit, to bring with them actually 10 copies of the very beginning of their short story or novel. And time permitting, we'll go through as many of them as there's time for and talk about, well, is this magical realism or isn't it? Are we not sure? What is this? How is it working? What could we do? What can we suggest to maybe make the language pop more, make the characters a little bit more exciting? That's going to be the focus of this 2-day workshop. And I'm excited to do it. This is going to be a new thing for me, and I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, I think it will be too. And yeah, I think you'll get a good crowd.
I hope so. I'm really I always love working with students, and I love hearing what writers bring to the table. It takes a lot of courage to do that. I really bow. You can't see me bowing, but imagine me bowing to students who come in with work and say, I want to share what I've written and I welcome your feedback. My feedback, by the way, is always extremely kind. I have very strict rules given to the class as to how to respond because what we don't want to do, I think Rick Shaw talked about this or it was another one of your guests. We really want to create a workshop atmosphere where people don't feel shut down. The main thing is for people to come out inspired to write more, not to have received so much feedback they don't know what to do with it, or to feel criticized for trying, which is terrible, and we don't want that to happen.
Definitely, definitely. That has always been, I've been around the conference for 33 years now, and that's one of the things that that I know that they used to actually have printed rules for read and critique, and one of the suggested guidelines was not rules, but guidelines was to start with something positive.
Yep, yep.
Yeah,
And end with something positive
yes,
also.
yeah,
Yeah, oh, it's
true.
wonderful to hear. Well, I felt that the couple of times I've been to the conference, I felt the kindness vibe, which frankly is kind of vibe number one when you're working with creatives. Everybody needs to feel supported and safe in the space they're in, and I think the Santa Barbara conference really does that.
Yes, and well, thank you for helping create that safe space
You bet, my
and
pleasure.
and thank you for talking to me today.
Thank you, Lisa. This was so fun.